October 13th, 1875. The ink is brown with age, the paper brittle, but the words still pulse with a feverish life. Tonight, the veil thinned. I saw what I was not meant to see. The patient's eyes empty, yet brimming with secrets. I have crossed a threshold, and there is no return. So begins the final entry in the ledger of Dr. Silas Elwood, chief physician of Briar Hollow Sanatorium. A name that once inspired hope and now conjures only dread. For decades, the ledger was hidden, locked away in a rusted strongbox beneath the crumbling floorboards of the East Wing. Its pages are stained with more than ink. There are smudges that look suspiciously like blood, and margins crowded with frantic, looping script. Some say the ledger is cursed, that those who read it are haunted by visions, by whispers in the night. Others dismiss it as the ravings of a man driven mad by isolation and ambition. But the truth, as always, is far more complicated than, far more terrifying. Tonight, we open the ledger together. We will walk the shadowed halls of Briar Hollow, where the gaslights flicker and the walls seem to breathe. We will meet the lost souls who wandered its corridors, and the doctor whose genius became his damnation. What you are about to hear has been buried for over a century, suppressed by those who feared its power. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. Are you ready to see what lies beneath the surface of history? To confront the darkness that science could not explain? If so, keep watching. The ledger is open, and the story is just beginning. Briar Hollow Sanatorium stood at the edge of the world, or so it seemed to those who found themselves within its grasp. In 1875, the world was changing at a dizzying pace. Railways stitched the countryside together, telegraphs hummed with distant voices, and the promise of science seemed boundless. The Victorian age was an era of invention and enlightenment, where men in starched collars and women in bustled skirts spoke of progress as if it were a birthright. Yet, for all its optimism, there were places the light of reason could not reach. The sanatorium itself was a sprawling edifice of red brick and gray stone, perched atop a lonely hill, surrounded by a forest that locals called the Briar Wood. The trees grew thick and wild, their branches tangled like the fingers of the dead, and in autumn, a perpetual mist clung to the ground, muffling sound and swallowing footsteps. The only road that led to Briar Hollow was little more than a rutted track, winding through the woods like a scar. Carriages rarely passed, and those who did often quickened their pace, eager to leave the shadow of the sanatorium behind. To the outside world, Briar Hollow was a beacon of hope, a place where the afflicted might find solace, where the broken might be mended. Its founder, Dr. Silas Elwood, was celebrated in medical journals for his humane innovations in the treatment of the mind. The sanatorium's grand opening was attended by dignitaries and philanthropists, all eager to witness the dawn of a new era in mental health. The building itself was a marvel. High arched windows to let in the healing light, gardens for gentle walks, and wards designed to soothe rather than confine. But beneath the surface, a different story simmered. The villagers in the nearby hamlet of Ashcombe whispered that the land was cursed, that nothing grew in the shadow of Briar Hollow except thorns and sorrow. They spoke of strange lights flickering in the upper windows at night, of screams carried on the wind, and of patients who entered the sanatorium never to be seen again. Children dared each other to touch the iron gates, and old women crossed themselves when the name was spoken. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with contradictions. By day, the halls echoed with the polite clatter of teacups and the soft shuffle of slippers on polished floors. Nurses in crisp uniforms tended to patients with gentle hands, and Dr. Elwood himself made his rounds, dispensing kind words and laudanum in equal measure. There were lectures on phrenology and mesmerism, and the library boasted the latest medical texts from London and Paris. Hope, it seemed, was everywhere. Yet, as dusk fell and the gaslights flickered to life, the mood shifted. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the air grew heavy with the scent of damp stone and something sweeter, something rotten. The staff spoke in hushed tones of the midnight rounds, when Dr. Elwood would disappear into the restricted wing. ledger in hand, accompanied only by the most troubled patients. Some said he was searching for a cure. Others believed he was searching for something else entirely. Rumors clung to Briar Hollow like ivy. There were tales of a patient who had gouged out her own eyes, claiming she saw the truth in the doctor's office. Another spoke of a boy who vanished from his bed, leaving only a trail of muddy footprints and a single, blood-stained page from the ledger. The sanatorium's reputation began to curdle, and the number of admissions dwindled. Still, Dr. Elwood pressed on, undeterred by gossip or tragedy. To the hopeful, Briar Hollow was a sanctuary. To the fearful, it was a prison. And to those who knew the truth, it was something far worse, a place where the boundaries between science and superstition, sanity and madness, life and death, grew thin as mist. The legend of Briar Hollow was born not from a single event, but from 1,000 whispered fears, each one feeding the next, until the sanatorium itself seemed to breathe with secrets. Tonight, we step inside. The doors are open, the ledger is waiting, and the story of Briar Hollow is ready to be told. Dr. Silas Elwood was a man of contradictions, a figure who inspired both admiration and unease. Born in 1839 to a family of modest means in the industrial heart of Manchester, he was the youngest of 5, a sickly child who spent more time with books than with playmates. His mother, a devout woman, believed her son was touched by providence, destined for greatness. His father, a machinist with rough hands and a sharper tongue, saw only frailty and warned Silas that the world would not be kind to dreamers. Yet, it was precisely this tension between faith and skepticism, hope and hardship, that shaped the boy into the man who would one day preside over Briar Hollow. Silas excelled at his studies, earning a scholarship to Oxford, where he devoured the latest treatises on anatomy, psychology, and the burgeoning field of neurology. He was fascinated by the mind's mysteries, by the invisible wounds that could cripple a person as surely as any broken bone, while his peers chased the prestige of surgery or the comfort of private practice. Silas was drawn to the shadows, to the patients others had given up on. By the time he arrived in Ashcombe, Dr. Elwood was already a rising star. He was tall and thin, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic, and he had a way of making each patient feel as if they were the only person in the world. The townspeople were wary. At first his accent marked him as an outsider, and his methods were unconventional, but his results spoke for themselves. Under his care, some patients who had been written off as hopeless began to show signs of improvement. The local paper called him the miracle worker of Briar Hollow. But behind the accolades and polite smiles, Dr. Elwood was a man haunted by questions. He kept meticulous notes, filling ledger after ledger with observations, sketches, and theories. He was obsessed with the idea that madness was not a curse, but a puzzle to be solved, a malfunction of the mind that could be repaired with enough patience and ingenuity. He read widely, from the works of Mesmer and Charcot to the forbidden tomes of alchemists and mystics. He believed that the mind was a labyrinth, and he was determined to find its center, no matter the cost. In public, Elwood was the model of Victorian propriety. He attended church, hosted charity teas, and donated generously to the local orphanage. He was unfailingly polite, even to those who whispered behind his back. But in private, his obsessions grew. He spent long nights in his study, poring over case files by candlelight, his hands stained with ink and something darker. He began to experiment with new treatments, hypnosis, isolation, electrotherapy, always pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. He justified his actions with the language of science, but there were moments when even he wondered if he was crossing a line. His colleagues noticed the change. Dr. Margaret Hensley, his trusted assistant, wrote in her diary of a restlessness in the doctor, a fever in his eyes that I have not seen before. The nurses whispered that he spoke to himself in the empty corridors, that he kept strange hours and stranger company. Some claimed to have seen him in the garden at midnight, digging in the earth, muttering prayers in a language no one recognized. Yet, For all his eccentricities, there was a vulnerability to Dr. Elwood, a sense that he was driven not by ambition alone, but by a desperate need to prove himself. He had seen too much suffering, too many lives ruined by forces no one understood. He was determined to find answers, to bring light to the darkness, even if it meant venturing into forbidden territory. He told himself it was for the greater good, that every risk was justified if it led to a cure. But the line between genius and madness is perilously thin, and Dr. Elwood was beginning to lose his balance. The more he learned, the more elusive the truth became. His ledger, once a tool for healing, became a confessional, a place to record not just his successes, but his doubts, his failures, his fears. He wrote of dreams that left him gasping for air, of voices that called to him from the walls, of a presence in the sanatorium that watched and waited. Empathy and suspicion warred in those who knew him. Was he a visionary, or a madman, a healer, or a monster? The answer, perhaps, was both. For in the end, Dr. Elwood was a man who dared to look into the abyss and found the abyss looking back. And as the shadows lengthened over Briar Hollow, it became clear that his story was far from over. They called them inmates, lunatics, the afflicted. But within the walls of Briar Hollow, each patient carried a story of life interrupted, a voice nearly lost to the echoing corridors and the relentless ticking of the ward clocks. To understand the true cost of Dr. Elwood's ambition, we must listen to these voices, however faint, and remember the souls who wandered the sanatorium's shadowed halls. First, there was Clara Finch, a girl of 16 with hair the color of wheat and eyes that never quite met your own. Clara had been a promising pianist, the pride of her small village, until the winter her mother died. Grief hollowed her out, left her hands trembling and her mind adrift. She began to hear music where there was none, haunting melodies that played only for her. Her father, unable to bear the change in his once bright daughter, brought her to Briar Hollow, hoping for a cure. In her first weeks, Clara filled the ward with the sound of her humming, fingers dancing across invisible keys. But as the treatments grew harsher, ice baths, isolation, the strange, whispered sessions with Dr. Elwood, heard music faded. By spring, she sat silent in the garden, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then there was Thomas Bell, a former school teacher whose mind had begun to unravel after the death of his wife and child in a house fire. He arrived at Briar Hollow, clutching a charred locket, his knuckles white with grief. Thomas was gentle, always eager to help the nurses, but at night he would wander the halls, searching for his family, calling their names in a voice that grew more desperate with each passing week. Dr. Elwood took a particular interest in Thomas, convinced that his visions of his lost loved ones were not delusions, but clues to the workings of the mind. The doctor's experiments grew more invasive: hypnosis, dream deprivation, even the administration of strange tinctures. Thomas's cries became screams, echoing through the sanatorium, until one night he vanished from his locked room. All that remained was a locket, left open on his pillow, and a single page torn from the ledger, smeared with ink and something darker. Among the outcasts was Agnes Crowley, a woman in her 40s, with a sharp tongue and a reputation for witchcraft. She had lived on the edge of Ashcombe, tending her garden of herbs and muttering to herself. When a fever swept through the village, taking 3 children, the townsfolk blamed Agnes, dragging her to Briar Hollow in the dead of night. She arrived, bruised and defiant, refusing to speak to anyone but Dr. Elwood. The doctor, fascinated by her knowledge of plants and old remedies, spent hours in conversation with her, recording her stories in his ledger. But as the weeks passed, Agnes grew gaunt and hollow-eyed, plagued by nightmares she claimed were not her own. She spoke of shadows that crept along the walls, of voices that whispered secrets in the dark. One morning, she was found in the garden, her hands buried in the earth, her mouth filled with dirt. The staff said she had lost her mind, but some believed she was trying to bury something, perhaps a secret, perhaps herself. There was also young Samuel Pritchard, a boy of just 9 years, whose only crime was being born different. Samuel did not speak, but he drew endless, intricate sketches of the sanatorium. its rooms and corridors, and things that should not have been there. The staff dismissed his drawings as childish nonsense, but Dr. Elwood saw patterns, symbols, a map of the mind's hidden places. Samuel became the subject of the doctor's most ambitious experiments, subjected to hours of observation and strange rituals meant to unlock his silence. The boy's drawings grew darker, filled with twisted figures and gaping mouths. One night, Samuel disappeared, leaving behind a final drawing, the sanatorium, swallowed by a great black fog, with a single figure standing at its heart. Each patient brought their own burdens, their own hopes and fears. Some, like Clara, faded quietly into the background, their spirits eroded by the relentless tide of treatment. Others, like Thomas and Agnes, fought back in their own ways, resisting the doctor's methods even as they were consumed by them. And some, like Samuel, left behind only questions, an incident, and impossible to forget. Their stories are not just footnotes in Dr. Elwood's ledger. They are the heart of Briar Hollow's tragedy. The reason the sanatorium's name is still spoken in hushed tones. These were not monsters or madmen, but people fragile, hopeful, desperate for relief. They trusted in the promise of science, in the kindness of strangers, and in the hope that their suffering might one day end. As you listen to their stories, ask yourself, what would you have done in their place? Would you have trusted the doctor or run from him? Would you have fought or surrendered? The answers are not easy, and perhaps that is the point. For in the end, the lost voices of Briar Hollow remind us that every experiment, every ambition, comes at a cost, and that some debts can never be repaid. In the beginning, Dr. Elwood's experiments at Briar Hollow were cloaked in the language of progress. He spoke of therapeutic innovation, of humane alternatives to the brutal restraints and punishments that had long defined the treatment of the mentally ill. The staff, eager to believe in the promise of a gentler age, followed his lead. Patients were no longer chained to their beds or locked in dark cells. Instead, they were invited to participate in what Elwood called the restoration of the mind. The first of these experiments was the mirror room. It was a small chamber, lined on all sides with polished glass, where patients were encouraged to confront their own reflections. Elwood believed that, by facing themselves, the afflicted might reclaim the parts of their identity lost to madness. At first, the results seemed promising. Clara Finch, the pianist, spent hours in the mirror room, her fingers tracing patterns on the glass as she hummed forgotten melodies. Thomas Bell, the grieving schoolteacher, wept openly at his own reflection, speaking to it as if it were his lost wife. The staff noted improvements, calmer moods, fewer outbursts, a sense of hope, but the mirror room had its shadows. Some patients began to report seeing things in the glass faces that were not their own, movements that did not match their own gestures. Agnes Crowley, the accused witch, refused to enter the room after a single session, claiming she saw the devil's eyes staring back at her. Dr. Elwood dismissed these fears as symptoms of their illness, but he recorded every detail in his ledger. His curiosity piqued. Next came the dream trials. Elwood was fascinated by the idea that dreams held the key to the mind's deepest wounds. He devised a regimen of sleep deprivation, followed by carefully administered doses of laudanum and belladonna to induce vivid, controlled hallucinations. Patients were asked to recount their visions, which Elwood meticulously transcribed. He believed that by mapping the landscape of their dreams, he could chart a path to recovery. At first, the dream trials seemed harmless, even enlightening. Samuel Pritchard, the silent boy, began to draw a new image, the strange, swirling shapes that Elwood interpreted as breakthroughs. Thomas Bell described seeing his family in a field of white flowers, a vision that left him peaceful for days. But as the trials continued, the dreams grew darker. Patients awoke screaming, convinced they had been visited by shadowy figures. Some refused to sleep at all, terrified of what awaited them in the dark. The staff grew uneasy, but Elwood pressed on, convinced he was on the verge of a discovery. The third experiment was the isolation chamber. Unlike the mirror room, this was a place of sensory deprivation, padded cell, soundproofed, and windowless, where patients were left alone for hours, sometimes days. Elwood believed that by stripping away all external stimuli, he could force the mind to confront its own demons. He called it the crucible of the self. The results were mixed, at best. Some patients emerged calm, even serene, claiming to have found clarity in the silence. Others were shattered by the experience, their minds fracturing under the weight of their own thoughts. Agnes Crowley, after 3 days in the chamber, refused to speak to anyone but Elwood, her eyes wild with terror. She claimed to have heard voices, whispers, that promised salvation or damnation, depending on who was listening. It was during these early experiments that the first real cracks began to show. The staff, once enthusiastic, grew wary. Nurse Hensley confided in her diary, "The doctor's methods are unsettling. I fear we are crossing a line, though I cannot say where it lies." The patients, too, began to change. Some became withdrawn, others violent. The air in the sanatorium grew heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Yet, for every failure, Elwood found a reason to continue. He was convinced that he was on the cusp of a breakthrough, that the suffering was a necessary step on the path to enlightenment. He began to keep a second ledger, hidden from the staff, where he recorded his most controversial observations, notes on the strange phenomena reported by patients, sketches of symbols found carved into the walls, accounts of inexplicable events. It was in this secret ledger that Elwood first wrote of the presence. He described a sensation of being watched, of a coldness that crept into the room during his experiments. He noted that the patients most affected by the mirror room and the isolation chamber often spoke of the same figure, a tall, shadowy man with hollow eyes, who appeared in their dreams and reflections. Elwood dismissed these accounts as shared delusion, but the frequency with which they occurred troubled him. The experiments grew more intense. Elwood began to combine methods, subjecting patients to the mirror room after days in the isolation chamber, or administering higher doses of his dream-inducing tinctures. The results were unpredictable. Some patients lapsed into catatonia. Others became violent, attacking staff or fellow inmates. The sanatorium's reputation, once sterling, began to tarnish. Families withdrew their loved ones, and the villagers' whispers grew louder. Still, Elwood pressed on, driven by a conviction that bordered on fanaticism. He wrote, "If I am to bring light to this darkness, I must be willing to walk where others fear to tread. Science demands sacrifice. Progress is never painless." But as the line between science and sacrilege blurred, the cost of Elwood's ambition became impossible to ignore. The sanatorium was changing its halls colder, its shadows deeper, its secrets more dangerous. And as the experiments grew more disturbing, one question began to haunt everyone within Briar Hollow's walls. Was Dr. Elwood a pioneer or a heretic? Was he healing the mind or damning the soul? The answer, it seemed, was waiting in the next page of the ledger, page stained with ink and something far more sinister. The ledger, once a testament to scientific rigor, soon became a confessional, a haunted diary where Dr. Elwood's handwriting grew more frantic, the margins crowded with cryptic symbols and desperate annotations. The early entries were clinical, methodical, but as the months wore on, the tone shifted. The language became feverish, the observations tinged with dread. It was as if the act of recording the sanatorium's secrets had begun to warp the doctor's mind, drawing him ever deeper into the abyss. One entry, dated November 2nd, 1875, reads, "Subject, Agnes Crowley. Session in mirror room. Patient claims to see the man with no face standing behind her reflection. She weeps, claws at the glass, begs to be released. I see nothing, but the temperature drops. My breath fogs the mirror. I feel watched. Must repeat experiment." Another, written in a trembling hand, details a night when the sanatorium's gaslights flickered and died, plunging the halls into darkness. The patients scream. "I hear footsteps in the corridor, but when I open the door, there is only shadow." Samuel's drawings have changed. He sketches the same figure over and over, tall, hollow-eyed, arms outstretched. The staff refuse to enter the east wing after dusk. I cannot blame them. The ledger's pages grow more disturbing as Elwood's experiments cross the threshold from science into something far older, far darker. He begins to reference ancient texts, Paracelsus, Agrippa, the forbidden grimoires of the Middle Ages. He writes of symbols found carved into the walls of the isolation chamber. Symbols that no patient could have known, yet appeared overnight, etched deep into the stone. The language is not Latin, nor Greek. It is older. I dream of it now, the shapes burning behind my eyelids. Elwood's obsession with the presence intensifies. He records a series of midnight rituals, conducted in secret, meant to pierce the veil between worlds. He describes drawing chalk circles on the floor, lighting candles made from tallow and herbs provided by Agnes, chanting words that leave his tongue numb and his mind reeling. The air thickens, the shadows move. I hear a voice, not my own, whispering from the darkness. It promises knowledge, if I am willing to pay the price. The patients, too, are drawn into these rituals, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. Elwood writes of a night when Clara Finch, the pianist, is brought to the mirror room after a week in the isolation chamber. She does not speak. Her eyes are black with exhaustion. I place her in the center of the circle, instruct her to look into the glass. The candles flicker. For a moment, I see another face in the mirror, my own, but twisted, grinning. Clara screams. The glass shatters. She collapses, blood streaming from her hands. I cannot explain what I saw. I do not try. The staff begin to break under the strain. Nurse Hensley resigns, leaving behind a letter filled with rambling warnings. He is opening doors that should remain closed. The patients are not the only ones being changed. The sanatorium is sick. The walls bleed at night. The remaining nurses avoid Elwood, whispering that he no longer sleeps, that he wanders the halls at all hours, muttering to himself, clutching the ledger as if it were a holy relic. The ledger's most damning entries come in the winter of 1875, as the experiments spiral out of control. Elwood writes of a night when the sanatorium is enveloped in a thick, unnatural fog. The patients are restless. The staff refuse to leave their rooms. I hear chanting from the garden, Agnes perhaps, or something else. I follow the sound, ledger in hand. The fog is alive, writhing, filled with shapes that dart just out of sight. I see Samuel standing at the edge of the trees, his eyes wide, his mouth moving in silent prayer. He points to the sky. I look up. The stars are gone. He describes a series of disappearances. First, Thomas Bell, then Samuel, then to orderlies who had tried to restrain Agnes during one of her fits. They are simply gone. No trace, no blood, no struggle. Only the smell of earth and the sound of distant music. The villagers say the sanatorium is cursed. I begin to believe them. Elwood's entries become increasingly fragmented, as if he is losing his grip on reality. He writes of dreams that bleed into waking life, of voices that call to him from the walls, of a hunger that grows in the heart of Briar Hollow. The presence is stronger now. It knows my name. It wants something from me. I am afraid, but I cannot stop. The work must continue. He records a final experiment, one he calls the opening of the gate. He gathers the remaining patients in the chapel, draws the ancient symbols on the floor, lights the candles, and begins to chant. The air crackles, the walls tremble, the patients scream, their voices blending into a single, inhuman wail. The presence enters the room. I see it, at last tall, hollow-eyed, its mouth a gaping void. It reaches for me. I drop the ledger. The candles go out. The last entry is little more than a scrawl. I have seen the other side. There is no cure, only hunger, only darkness. The ledger ends there, the final pages stained and torn, as if someone or something tried to erase what had been written. The sanatorium's records show that Dr. Elwood vanished that night, along with half the patients and several staff. The building was abandoned, left to rot in the mist, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and fear. But the ledger survived, hidden beneath the floorboards, waiting to be found. Its pages are a map of descent, a record of a man who began as a healer and ended as a heretic, a warning to those who would follow in his footsteps. And now, as we read these words together, I must ask, what do you believe happened in Briar Hollow? Was it madness or something more? Do you think that mind can open doors best left closed? If you have your own theory, or if you've ever felt the chill of something watching from the shadows, share your story below. The ledger is open, and its secrets are not yet done with us. For in the end, the true horror of Briar Hollow is not what was done, but what was unleashed and what may still linger, waiting for the next curious soul to turn the page. The winter of 1875 settled over Briar Hollow like a shroud, and with it came a darkness that no lamp could dispel. The sanatorium, once a monument to progress, now felt more like a mausoleum, its corridors echoing with footsteps that never seemed to belong to anyone living. The air was thick with fear, and the boundaries between reason and superstition began to dissolve. It started with the disappearances. At first, they were explained away, patients wandering off in the night, perhaps, or staff resigning without notice. But soon, the numbers grew impossible to ignore. Thomas Bell's empty bed, Samuel's abandoned drawings, the sudden absence of two orderlies who had been seen only hours before. Each time, Dr. Elwood would offer a rational explanation, his voice calm, his eyes haunted. The mind is a labyrinth, he would say. Sometimes, people simply lose their way. But the staff no longer believed him. Whispers spread through the wards. The sanatorium was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had suffered within its walls. Nurse Hensley, once Elwood's most loyal supporter, became convinced that something unnatural was at work. She confided in the remaining nurses, urging them to keep watch at night, to avoid the east wing, where the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. She carried a small silver cross in her pocket, a talisman against a growing sense of evil. Others turned to older superstitions, salt scattered across thresholds, iron nails hammered into doorframes, prayers muttered under their breath. The sanatorium, built on the promise of science, was now a battleground between faith and fear. The patients, too, felt the change. Some became violent, lashing out at staff and fellow inmates. Others withdrew into themselves, refusing to eat or speak, their eyes fixed on some distant horror only they could see. Clara Finch, once the sanatorium's gentle songbird, now sat in the garden for hours, her hands bleeding from scratching at the frozen earth. Agnes Crowley, the accused witch, began to chant in a language no one recognized, her voice rising and falling in time with the flickering gaslights. The line between patient and staff blurred, as everyone became a prisoner of the mounting dread. Supernatural events escalated. Doors slammed shut without warning, locking staff and patients alike in rooms that grew colder by the hour. Windows frosted over from the inside, obscuring the world beyond. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if the building were alive, breathing in the fear of its inhabitants. At night, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, heavy, deliberate, always just out of sight. Some claimed to see figures moving in the mist outside, tall and faceless, watching from the edge of the woods. One night, a nurse named Edith vanished while making her rounds. Her lantern was found at the end of the corridor, still burning, but there was no sign of her. The staff searched every room, every closet, but it was as if she had simply ceased to exist. In the days that followed, more staff disappeared, their belongings left behind, their names scratched from the records. Panic set in. The remaining nurses barricaded themselves in the staff room, refusing to leave after dark. Dr. Elwood, increasingly isolated, retreated to his study, emerging only to conduct his experiments or to pace the halls, muttering to himself. The sanatorium's fragile order collapsed. Patients roamed the corridors unchecked, some in a daze, others driven by a wild animal fear. The staff, once united by purpose, turned on each other accusations of sabotage, of witchcraft, of collusion with the darkness that now ruled Briar Hollow. Nurse Hensley accused Dr. Elwood of summoning the evil that plagued them, her voice trembling with rage and terror. Elwood, for his part, insisted that what was happening could be explained, that the mind was simply reacting to stress, to isolation, to the collective hysteria of the group. But even he could not ignore the evidence mounting around him. The contrast between reason and superstition reached its breaking point. Some staff clung to the rituals of science, charting symptoms, administering sedatives, recording every incident in meticulous detail. Others turned to desperate measures, exorcisms performed in the chapel, salt circles drawn around beds, prayers shouted into the darkness. The sanatorium became a place of competing realities, each more terrifying than the last. The final days were a fever dream of chaos. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows, seeping through the cracks. The gaslights flickered and died, plunging the building into darkness. The patients wailed, their voices rising in a chorus of despair. The staff, exhausted and terrified, barricaded themselves in the dining hall, clutching whatever weapons they could find: kitchen knives, broken chair legs, even shards of glass from the shattered mirrors. Dr. Elwood, driven by a mixture of guilt and obsession, made one last attempt to restore order. He gathered the remaining staff and patients in the chapel, insisting that they could face the darkness together. He spoke of science, of reason, of the power of the human mind to overcome fear. But as he spoke, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The temperature dropped, their breath hanging in the air like smoke. The candles flickered, then went out. In the darkness, something moved. A presence, cold and ancient, filled the room. The patients screamed, the staff wept, and Dr. Elwood's voice faltered. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Then, a single inhuman wail echoed through the chapel, shaking the very walls of Briar Hollow. When the doors finally opened, hours later, the chapel was empty. The sanatorium was silent, save for the wind howling through broken windows. Those who ventured inside in the days that followed found only traces of what had happened: handprints on the walls, pages torn from the ledger, symbols scrawled in ash and blood. The survivors, few as they were, refused to speak of what they had seen. Some fled the country, others took their own lives, haunted by memories they could not escape. Briar Hollow was abandoned, left to rot in the mist. The villagers avoided the hill, warning their children never to go near the iron gates. The sanatorium became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered by firelight. Some said it was cursed, others that it was simply a place where the veil between worlds had grown too thin. But the truth, as always, was more complicated and far more terrifying. For in the end, Briar Hollow was not destroyed by madness or superstition, but by the collision of the two. It was a place where reason failed, where science became sacrilege, and where the darkness that dwells in every human heart was given free rein. And as the fog rolled in, swallowing the ruins, one question remained: was Briar Hollow ever truly a place of healing, or was it always doomed to become a house of horrors? The answer, perhaps, lies in the silence that lingers still, waiting for the next soul, brave or foolish enough, to enter. It began with a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the world. The clocks in Briar Hollow stopped at midnight, their hands frozen, the tick and talk that had marked the passage of every day suddenly absent. Outside, the wind died, and the ever-present mist thickened, turning from pale gray to a suffocating, unnatural black. The sanatorium, already a place of dread, became a tomb. Inside, the last survivors huddled in the chapel, the only room with a lock sturdy enough to keep out whatever haunted the halls. Dr. Elwood stood at the altar, his face gaunt, eyes wild with exhaustion and terror. Around him, the remaining staff and patients clung to each other, their breaths shallow, their prayers desperate. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat, fear, and something metallic, blood perhaps, or the memory of it. The fog pressed against the stained glass windows, blotting out the moon and stars. It seeped through the cracks, curling along the floor like living smoke. The candles flickered, their flames shrinking, as if afraid. Shadows danced on the walls, growing longer, darker, until they seemed to move with a will of their own. Dr. Elwood opened his ledger, his hands trembling. He read aloud from its pages, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. We are not alone. The veil is thin. Tonight, we face what we have summoned. His words were met with sobs, with whispered pleas to God, with the hollow laughter of those who had already surrendered to madness. Then, the doors began to shake. At first, it was a gentle rattle, like a child testing a lock. But soon, the wood groaned and splintered, the iron hinges screeching. The fog poured in, thick and cold, swirling around their feet. The temperature dropped, and every breath became a struggle. The first to fall was Nurse Hensley. She screamed as the fog touched her, her skin blistering, her eyes rolling back. She collapsed, convulsing, her mouth open in a silent wail. The others tried to pull her back, but the fog clung to her, dragging her into the darkness. Her screams faded, replaced by a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Panic erupted. Some tried to break the stained glass, to escape into the night, but the windows would not yield. Others fell to their knees, begging for mercy, for forgiveness, for release. Dr. Elwood alone remained standing, his eyes fixed on the altar, where the ledger lay open. He began to chant, the words a twisted blend of Latin, Greek, and something older, something that scraped at the mind like broken glass. The fog thickened, rising to their waists, their chests, their throats. Shapes moved. Within it tall, faceless figures with hollow eyes, their arms outstretched. The patients wailed, clutching at each other, at the pews, at the very stones of the chapel. The staff fought back, swinging lanterns, crosses, anything they could find, but the fog swallowed every effort, every hope. And then, the revelation. As the fog reached the altar, Dr. Elwood's chanting grew louder, more frantic. The ledger's pages fluttered, as if caught in a wind only they could feel. The symbols, scrawled in its margins, began to glow, pulsing with a sickly, greenish light. The air crackled with energy, the very walls trembling. Suddenly, the fog parted, and a figure stepped forward. A man, or what had once been a man, tall, impossibly thin, his face a blank expanse, save for two hollow, black eyes. He wore a tattered patient's gown, stained with blood and ink. In his hands, he held a mirror, its surface cracked and dark. The survivors stared, transfixed, as the figure raised the mirror. One by one, their reflections appeared not as they were, but as they might have been, twisted by fear, by guilt, by the secrets they had tried to bury. Clara Finch saw herself with broken hands, unable to play, her mouth sewn shut. Agnes Crowley saw herself burning at the stake, her screams echoing through the ages. Dr. Elwood saw himself standing alone in the ruins of Briar Hollow, the ledger in his hands, his eyes empty. The figure spoke, its voice a chorus of all the lost souls of the sanatorium. You opened the door. You called us. Now, you must pay the price. The fog surged forward, engulfing the survivors. One by one, they vanished, their bodies dissolving into the mist, their screams fading into silence. Only Dr. Elwood remained, rooted to the spot, the ledger clutched to his chest. The figure approached, its hollow eyes fixed on him. Elwood fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I only wanted to help, he whispered. I only wanted to understand. The figure knelt beside him, placing the mirror in his hands. Then see, it said. Elwood looked into the mirror, and what he saw drove him mad. He saw every experiment, every failure, every soul he had damned in his quest for knowledge. He saw the sanatorium as it truly was, a place of suffering, of broken promises, of darkness that could never be dispelled. He saw himself, not as a healer, but as a monster. The ledger snapped shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The fog receded, leaving the chapel empty, save for the ledger and the shattered mirror. Outside, the black mist lifted, revealing the ruins of Briar Hollow, silent and still. In the days that followed, the villagers found the sanatorium abandoned. The doors hung open, the halls empty. In the chapel, they found the ledger, its pages stained and torn, and the mirror, its surface cracked beyond repair. Of Dr. Elwood and the others, there was no sign, only the lingering sense of something watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of sight. The legend of the Night of the Black Fog spread quickly. Some said the sanatorium had been swallowed by the devil himself. Others whispered that the souls of the lost still wandered the halls, trapped between worlds. But those who read the ledger, who dared to look into the mirror, knew the truth. Briar Hollow had been undone not by madness, but by the hunger for knowledge, by the arrogance of those who believed they could master the darkness. And so, the story of Briar Hollow ended as it began, in silence, in shadow, in the secrets that linger long after the last candle has gone out. But the ledger remains, its pages waiting for the next hand to turn them, for the next soul to seek answers in the dark. For some doors, once opened, can never be closed. When the sun finally rose over Briar Hollow, it found only ruins and silence. The sanatorium, once a proud monument to progress, was now a hollow shell, its windows shattered, its gardens overgrown, its halls echoing with the memory of screams. The villagers who dared approach in the days that followed found no trace of Dr. Elwood, his staff, or the patients. Only the ledger and the broken mirror remained, silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded within those walls. The official story, hastily written by the authorities, spoke of a tragic fire, of mass hysteria, of a doctor who had lost his mind and led his charges to ruin. The sanatorium was condemned, its doors chained shut, its name stricken from the records. But the people of Ashcombe knew better. They spoke in hushed tones of the black fog, of the night the lights went out, of the shadows that still lingered at the edge of the woods. Children were warned never to stray too close, and even the bravest souls avoided the hill after dark. As for Dr. Elwood, his fate became the stuff of legend. Some claimed he had been consumed by the very darkness he sought to understand, his soul trapped within the ledger's pages. Others whispered that he still wandered the ruins, a ghost forever searching for redemption. A few insisted he had escaped, changed beyond recognition, carrying the curse of Briar Hollow wherever he went. The truth, as always, was lost to time beneath layers of fear, guilt, and denial. But the scars left by Briar Hollow ran deeper than any could have imagined. The families of the vanished patients mourned in silence, their grief twisted by shame and unanswered questions. The staff who survived, those few who managed to flee before the final night, were haunted by nightmares, plagued by visions of fog and hollow-eyed figures. Some took their own lives, unable to bear the weight of what they had seen. Others vanished into obscurity, their names forgotten, their stories left untold. The sanatorium itself became a magnet for the curious and the desperate. Occult thrill seekers and would-be investigators crept through its ruins, searching for evidence of the supernatural. Some claimed to hear whispers in the empty halls, to see faces in the broken mirrors, to feel a cold hand brush their shoulder in the dark. A few found the ledger, read its pages, and left changed, some driven to madness, others to obsession. The curse of Briar Hollow, it seemed, was not so easily contained. Yet, even as the years passed and the world moved on, the story of Briar Hollow refused to die. It became a cautionary tale, a warning against the dangers of unchecked ambition, of the arrogance that comes from believing we can master the unknown. It was a story told by firelight, a shiver in the night, a shadow at the edge of reason. Psychologically, the legacy of Briar Hollow was profound. It forced a reckoning with the limits of science, with the ethical boundaries that must not be crossed. The medical community, shaken by the scandal, retreated from the more experimental treatments that had once seemed so promising. New laws were passed, new safeguards put in place, but the fear remained that somewhere, in some forgotten corner, another Dr. Elwood might be waiting, another door might be opened. Societally, the scars were just as deep. The people of Ashcombe became more insular, more suspicious of outsiders and new ideas. The sanatorium's ruins stood as a grim reminder of what happens when compassion is twisted by obsession, when the pursuit of knowledge becomes a descent into darkness. The legend of Briar Hollow became a mirror, reflecting the fears and failings of an entire generation, and yet, the questions linger. Was Dr. Elwood a monster, or a martyr to the cause of understanding the mind? Were the horrors of Briar Hollow the result of madness, or did something truly supernatural take root in those halls? Did the ledger record the ravings of a broken man, or the testimony of someone who glimpsed a reality beyond our own? Now, as you reflect on the story of Briar Hollow, I invite you to share your own theories. Do you believe the sanatorium was cursed, or was it simply a victim of its time? Was Dr. Elwood a visionary undone by his own hubris, or a warning to those who would follow in his footsteps? Have you ever encountered a place that felt wrong, as if it remembered the pain of those who came before? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Briar Hollow is not just a tale of the past, it is a question that echoes through time, waiting for each of us to answer. And as long as the ledger remains, as long as the ruins stand, the darkness will never be truly gone. What is the true cost of knowledge? At Briar Hollow, the pursuit of understanding became a double-edged sword, one that cut deeper than anyone could have foreseen. Dr. Elwood's story is not just a tale of ambition gone awry, but a meditation on the boundaries of science, the weight of morality, and the shadows that gather when we peer too far into the unknown. Science, at its best, is a force for healing and progress. It asks us to question, to seek, to push beyond the limits of what is known. But what happens when curiosity outpaces compassion? When the drive to discover blinds us to the suffering of others? Dr. Elwood believed he could cure madness, that he could map the labyrinth of the mind and bring light to its darkest corners. Yet, in his quest, he lost sight of the very humanity he sought to save. His experiments, once rooted in hope, became acts of desperation, sacrifices offered to a mystery that refused to yield. Morality, too, is a fragile thing. It is easy to judge the past, to condemn the choices made in the name of progress. But how often do we, in our own time, cross lines we cannot see? How many breakthroughs are built on the pain of those who could not consent, who could not escape? The story of Briar Hollow is a warning that the ends do not always justify the means, and that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And then there is the unknown, the vast, uncharted territory that lies beyond the reach of reason. Briar Hollow reminds us that not everything can be explained, that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The supernatural, the uncanny, the things that go bump in the night, are they figments of a fevered mind, or echoes of something real, something ancient, that waits for us in the dark? So, I ask you, where do you draw the line between curiosity and cruelty, between progress and peril? Do you believe there are truths best left undiscovered, or is it our duty to seek them out, no matter the cost? Have you ever faced a moment when your own pursuit of knowledge led you somewhere you wished you hadn't gone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Debate, question, reflect. The story of Briar Hollow is not just a relic of the past. It's a mirror held up to our own fears, our own ambitions, our own fragile sense of right and wrong. Perhaps, in the end, the greatest mystery is not what happened within those walls, but what we are willing to risk in the name of understanding. And as long as we keep asking, keep searching, the ledger of human curiosity will never truly close. Thank you for walking these haunted halls with me, for daring to peer into the shadows of Briar Hollow and confront the darkness that lingers in forgotten places. If you've made it this far, you are among the few brave enough to face the unsettling truths that history tries to bury. The story of Dr. Elwood and his cursed experiments is not just a tale of the past, it's a warning, a riddle, and perhaps a reflection of our own deepest fears. But as we close the ledger tonight, remember, not every page has been turned. There are still entries missing, rumors of a hidden wing beneath the sanatorium, and whispers of a final experiment that was never recorded. Some say the black fog returns on certain nights, and that the cries of the lost can still be heard if you listen closely enough. What secrets remain locked away in the ruins of Briar Hollow? What truths did Dr. Elwood take with him into the darkness? The answers may yet be waiting for those willing to seek them. If this story left you with chills, questions, or theories of your own, I invite you to share them in the comments below. Have you ever encountered a place that felt cursed, or a mystery that refused to let you go? Your stories and insights are what keep this community alive, and who knows, your comment might inspire the next tale we explore together. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey into the unknown. Next time, we'll be delving into another shadowed chapter of history, a tale of obsession, betrayal, and the price paid for forbidden knowledge. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep your lanterns lit, your minds open, and remember, some ledgers are never truly closed. The story of Briar Hollow is far from over, and as long as there are questions left unanswered, the darkness will always be waiting.